Welcome. This is a demo for our pandemic analytics project. Now we'll be looking at the next step, which is transforming the data. To transform this data, we'll be using three tools. We'll be using data flow, which is contained within Data Factory. We'll be using Databricks, and we'll be using HDInsights. All three options allow for distributed computing, which means we can process really large files really well. Let's start off with the data flow. We have two data flows, one for the cases and deaths data and the other one for the hospital admissions data. This is just an overview of the data flow for the cases and deaths data. We have a filter operation, a select, a pivot, a lookup operation, and then another select just to modify the data before we pass it to the sync data set. The hospital admissions data is a lot more complex, has a lot more stages, but we are mainly using the same operations apart from one alteration, which is a sorting operation. These two data flows have been put into pipelines so we can run them effectively and also create triggers for them so they can be run automatically. This is the pipeline for the cases and deaths, and this is the pipeline for the hospital's admissions. And we see that we have triggers for the two of them. Let's take a look at that. This is a trigger for to process the cases and deaths, and this is a trigger to process the hospital admissions. We will just go ahead and trigger both of them now, manually trigger both of them. Okay. And let's trigger the other one. We will come back and look at it once it's done executing. All right, both pipelines have completed now. We can go ahead and take a look at what exactly ran. Let's start off with the cases and death. So we have that the data flow ran successfully. Let's inspect it a bit. We can see that all the operations have green dots on top of them. Or green header rather. We'll take a look at the data that was written to the sink in a moment, but let's take a look at the other pipeline that was run. The admissions data pipeline as well. Let's inspect that. And again, we see that everything was run. We can take a look at the stages that were run, and we can also take a look at the lineage to kind of see the path that was followed. We can also take a look at some statistics on the data that we had, or rather some metrics on the data that was run. Taking a look at the partitions, the rows calculated, the time each operation took. This can be really helpful to figure out what operations are taking longer than expected to run and really effective for debugging purposes. Or system analytics also. All right, so that's it for this pipelines. Let's take a look at the data that we got from our transformations. For the hospital data, we're expecting two files because when we take a look at it, we have two syncs. We have a sync for the weekly sync and we have a daily sync. Whereas for the cases and deaths data, cases and deaths pipeline, we are expecting one file because we have one sync. Let's take a look at those. Right. We have the processed file. We're right now looking at the processed folder for ACDC. Let's take a look at the cases and deaths. What we have, we see that's a success. And why we see so many files here is because, as we mentioned, it follows a distributed computing architecture. And in this option, to make effective use of it, we have it write into multiple files. As each cluster completes its job, it writes it to a separate file. Essentially, we can go ahead and preview this file. just to see that we have what we expected. We do for this case, we have this is for the cases and deaths. So we have the data that we expect, we have the country codes, population, cases count, death counts, we have the source and the reported date. Let us go back and take a look at the population data that we edited. So sorry, rather than populations data, I actually do mean hospital admissions data. We have the daily hospital admissions data and also the weekly hospital admissions data. So let's go on back there, ECDC hospital admissions. We have two folders for the daily and also for the weekly, which is great. Let's start off with the daily data, which have it written similar to how the cases and deaths was written to multiple files. We have that it was a success, and let us go ahead and preview the data. This is the, let's be sure, ECDC process daily data. Okay, let's preview that. For the daily data, we see that we have the data as expected, the country code, population, the reported dates, it's reported daily, and we had sorted it, so we have the earliest dates first. So it's in a reverse chronological order. Let us go ahead and take a look at the weekly data next. We should have a few columns that are different from the daily data. Let's take a look at that. And we have the reported, let's expand this, the reported year week. We have the reported start date, week start date, and this should be the reported week end date. All right, so this has been the transformation for the, using data flow. Let's go ahead and look at the transformation using Databricks. All right, for the Databricks option, we have some steps we execute to transform the data. We read in the data, we use a pivot operation, we use a lookup, we use a join, and then we write the output back out to a file, rather a folder in this case, since it's distributed. All right, let's take a look at the pipeline. This is the pipeline we have. We're going to go ahead and trigger this pipeline manually. Let's go ahead and click OK there. So this pipeline is running. We'll come back and take a look at it once it's executed. For this pipeline, we do not have a specific cluster running. So it will automatically create a cluster, execute the job, and then deprovision the cluster. But this might take a couple of minutes to run. We're taking a look at the page where we currently have a cluster running. Right now, we're provisioning the compute. We're not manually provisioning the compute. Instead, our data factory is provisioning the compute for us, so we can run the operations we had in the notebook. All right, we have here that our compute has been created, and we have a success for running the notebook. So let's go back to our data factory and take a look at it. We have the pipeline was successful. Let's go back and take a look at all the pipeline runs. This was our most recent pipeline run, which we triggered manually, and this was for the transformation using Databricks. We are transforming the population data. All right, let's go ahead and take a closer look at what we had for the transformation. We have everything basically listed in here in this file. So let's take a look at the output data that we have. For that, we'll go on ahead back to our Storage Explorer. All right, so we're taking a look at Storage Explorer now. We have that. We have a couple of files written in here to Storage Explorer. Let's go ahead and preview this file. Or rather, maybe preview this one. Okay. yes, let's go ahead and preview this file, and we can see right here that we have our data transformed. In here we have the age groups. We have different age groups. The last time we took a look at it, we didn't have all the age groups like this. And right now this is because of the pivot operation that we used. So we pivoted on the different age groups. All right, that's great. And also we can see that we have multiple files in here, consistent with the distributed architecture. And for this particular cluster, let's go ahead and go back to Data Factory. For this particular implementation, we are using a Hadoop cluster just to reduce cost. All right, so we have one more transformation to take a look at, and that is the HDInsights transformation. All right, and for this option, we're actually going to be processing the testing data. In this option, we're using HDInsight to process the testing data. We're going to go ahead and trigger this implementation right now, manually trigger this, and right now we have the pipeline running. For this option, we already have a cluster provisioned. We pre-provisioned a cluster, so this should take relatively less time to start up and start running on the cluster. We'll take a look at the logs. All right, we're processing the testing data right now. All right, we have the compute information, the cluster name, the job ID is currently in progress. We can take a look at the error file. We'll just drag this over here. Right now we don't have any errors in the error file, so that's good. All right, we refreshed and we're taking another look at the error file. We have that the error file is populated. And since we ran a couple of commands in here, this is not really that readable, but we can see we created an external table here. So we have a couple of create statements. Let's go back and we have the pipeline run successfully. Let's go ahead and refresh that and actually take a look at our data lake where we have written the data into. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at our data lake. All right, we went ahead and clicked on the testing data. We see that it has a similar format to the other files where we're writing to a folder. But right now we don't have many files written in there, but let's take a look at the one file we do have in there. And this is our file. This is our processed file. We see that we have everything processed in here. Okay, let's take a look back at our data factory. This is what we have. We've used HDInsights to process the testing data. So far, we've looked at the three options we used to process the data. We used data flow within Data Factory, we used Databricks, and we used HDInsights. All these three options follow the distributed computing architecture, meaning we can process really large files. And now we're going to look at how to effectively run all these operations. So for these operations, I have triggered each and every one of them manually, but we can actually set up trigger runs that will run on a particular schedule. Let's take a look at that. We have a couple of triggers in here. One more thing is our execute pipeline here, which we use to run the ingestion and the processing pipeline. So we have a pipeline to run multiple pipelines. This is to run the pipeline for ingesting the population data, and this is to run the pipeline for processing the population data. Now we have multiple of these pipelines that have been run effectively. And we can take a look at the pipelines that we ran for the past 30 days. We see we have a lot of pipelines in here. We can take a look at the dashboard to see the pipelines that have that have succeeded, the activities we ran, and the triggers we ran. We do have here that we have some pipelines that failed, which is really good because we want to be able to see when a pipeline fails or not. And that is it for this section. One more thing we're going to look at is Ambari. We can use Ambari here to take a look basically at our HDInsights cluster. We're just going to go over to Hive View over here, and we're going to run a couple of queries on our HDInsights cluster to basically see the data that we just processed. All right, first of all, let's start out with show databases. Let's execute that. And we have a couple of databases in here. We have COVID reporting process, COVID reporting lookup, COVID reporting raw data. All right, let's go ahead and select everything we have from our COVID reporting. We browsed over here, so we had a COVID reporting database, COVID reporting processed database, and we have a testing table in there. So let's select all from the COVID reporting process database, the testing table, and we want to see the top 15 records. Let's go ahead and execute that. And we get some data. Right, so we can use Ambari to run queries on our data in our Hive clusters. All right, this is it for this demo. Thank you. See you in the next one.